Awesome here. He's an incredible man. Administrative information. In the event of emergency, fire escape is located to your right, the windows. We'll draw the curtains back, everybody will pile out the fire escape, takes you down to the alley. The assembly point will be on the street and the alley. So we get everybody together, we get a head count, the museum staff will make sure everybody's out of the building in the event of an emergency. That would be a fire. I'd like to introduce you to Delbert Sherritt today. You're going to be hearing from Delbert shortly. No eating in the classroom. Please pay attention, respect your comrades, that would be your classmates and the instructor. The next class, you guys have a week's break after today. You're off next week. Everybody know that? Okay, you're off for Easter. Or
April 1st, we need to start class at 10:30. Justin's teaching that day and he has
Okay.
to leave early.
can everybody, April the 1st, is everybody able to come in at 10:30? Is there a problem?
It's just the one class.
Okay, just the one class right now. So if everybody can remember that. And you know, we start late anyway. Everybody here today was here on time. I'm very impressed. Timeliness and punctuality are very important. The next class that I will be teaching will be week 26, which will be the United States and the Pacific Theater and the Mediterranean Theater. So without further ado, one other thing, we show photos in here sometimes. We don't show photographs to shock anybody. Sometimes they may be a little graphic. We put out ahead of time, you know, if it's offensive to somebody, and we're trying very hard, especially with the young kids in here, not to show any. If one slips by, but we always put out, please, you know, if you don't want to see it, walk to the back and come back. But I can tell you right now, in the next 12 weeks, there will be none that will even be close to being offensive. As you guys know, war is terrible. And war brings out the worst in humanity. And terrible things happen. But you guys, some of you are way too young to have to worry about that right now. So what we're trying to do is give you a good, solid history supplemental education. So let's talk about Pearl Harbor, 7 December 1941. Anybody want to tell me what the significance of that day is in American history? 7 December 1941, Pearl Harbor. What do you know about it?
I think there was a Japanese embassy talking to the U.S. and then Japan bombed it when they were.
That's a good summation. As Jeremy spoke in the last class, the Japanese aggression in the Pacific, the expansionism was underway, and the Japanese perceived the United States fleet at Pearl Harbor, Hawaiian Islands, as a threat to their expansionism. The Japanese actually had orchestrated a declaration of war that was to be issued to the United States. However, it got hung up administratively and bureaucratically, and the United States was not notified prior to the attack on Pearl Harbor. So, where is Pearl Harbor? It's in Hawaii. It was a U.S. territory in 1941. They called it Pearl Harbor, the Hawaiian Islands. The military correspondence from Pearl Harbor always abbreviates it TH, the Hawaiian Islands. All right, got a map here, a world map. Everybody see the arrow? Everybody see the red dot? That's Pearl Harbor. That's Los Angeles, California. That's Tokyo, Japan. So you can see it's rather distant from the United States. This is where the U.S. fleet was ported. This is where the base of U.S. Navy power resided. At the port, we had 8 U.S. battleships. Each battleship had a crew of about 1,500 men. These were massive ships. They carried 16-inch guns. They were really the big stick that Teddy Roosevelt referred to when he was in office. These were the base of power in the Pacific. We also had 3 aircraft carriers, which carried U.S. Naval aviation units, fighter planes, and dive bombers that were ported, as well as many other ships to include submarines, destroyers, frigates, etc. The Japanese began planning the attack for Pearl Harbor in January of 1941. So the attack was on 7 December 1941. They had 11 months to plan for this. Admiral Yamamoto was the presiding force in planning the attack. He was the naval officer in the Japanese Empire that was really responsible for this attack. Pearl Harbor, as some of you know, the Hawaiian Islands are multiple islands. Pearl Harbor was on Oahu, O-A-H-U. That was the island that Pearl Harbor was on. Adjacent to Pearl Harbor and nearby were other Army installations. Hickam Airfield, which contained many fighter planes. Schofield Barracks, which Schofield Barracks contained U.S. Army infantry and artillery units. Their job was to defend the islands in the event of Japanese aggression. 7 December 1941 was a Sunday. The U.S. military generally utilizes Sundays as days of rest. These are days that you can sleep late. These are days that you can get up and go to chow when you want. If you've been out all night long, like Delbert would have been, dancing, you could sleep late the next day. The Japanese considered this in their planning. They realized that the United States forces would be ill-prepared and relaxed on 7 December. So, at 7:55 a.m., that restful, peaceful period all changed. Many of the sailors, Marines, and soldiers were preparing to go to church. As I said, many were sleeping. In the Navy, many of the crewmen were sleeping on the ships. And I don't know, anybody in the military in here? Sundays, overseas, it's always a day of relaxation. You know, you've had a hectic week, you've worked 80 hours, this is a day that you just, you know, you sit back, you write letters to mom and dad. And again, the Japanese specifically planned to attack on a Sunday. Let's continue on. The Japanese attack force, 6 aircraft carriers, almost 300 aircraft. They positioned themselves, over 400 I should say, aircraft. I'm going to go back to the map. They positioned themselves 250 miles, 230 miles exactly north of the Hawaiian Islands. Complete surprise. The United States lost track of the Japanese fleet. 6 aircraft carriers, again with Admiral Yamamoto at the helm, launched 2 waves of aircraft. They carried torpedo bombers, dive bombers, and fighter planes. Somebody tell me what a torpedo bomber is.
Is it a underwater submarine that shoots torpedoes?
You're very good, and you're right. You're right. There are, and we're going to talk about Japanese submarines at Pearl Harbor. Torpedo bomber was an aircraft, and I'm going to show you one that carried a torpedo. Torpedoes, as you know, are launched either from submarine or aircraft under the surface. The ones launched by the aircraft skimmed along right below the surface. Their job was to hit the hulls of the ships, to knock out the hulls, to allow water in, and the ships can't maneuver, and ultimately to sink the ships. But over 400 of these aircraft. This is a Nakajima fighter known as a Zero. This was the fighter force for the Japanese attack force. There were hundreds of these planes. They flew cover for the torpedo bombers and for the dive bombers. They carried machine guns. They could carry 1 bomb. one small 250-pound up to a 500-pound bomb. This was the best fighter plane in the Pacific when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. It was better than any of the American fighters. We had what's called P-39s, we had P-40s, but the Japanese fighters were well made, highly maneuverable, very agile, and highly respected. This is a Val dive bomber. Now, a fighter plane, we just talked about the Zero. It engages in aerial fighting, it has machine guns. It may carry a bomb. It can strafe. You know, it comes in at a slight angle and strafes ground targets, in this case shipping, airfields, barracks. The dive bomber was designed to attack at a steep angle at a moderate altitude to a high altitude. So what they would do, they would come in, and the Japanese trained and trained and trained with models of the U.S. fleet, recognized the ships. Each squadron of Japanese aircraft was assigned specific targets. They just didn't go in there and attack en masse. They had specific ships they were looking for. The dive bombers would go up to altitude, come in, and then start a steep descent, and then get the target in their sights, release the bomb, and the bombs were up to 500-pounders. They would, if they were accurate, hit the ship and cause catastrophic damage. So these were Vals. They were very prone to enemy air attack, though. They were slow, and they were not that easily maneuverable. So the American planes could shoot these down if they had a chance to get in the air. This is a torpedo bomber that we talked about earlier. This is a Kate. You'll notice this device below the plane, that's a torpedo. What these guys would do, these were 2- and 3-man aircraft depending on the configuration. They would come in very low. If the ship was the wall, they would come in right above the water. Come in, again, specific targets, they would release that torpedo, then they would pull out of their approach. The torpedo would skim underneath the water and strike the target. It carried high explosive, massive torpedoes. And again, right under the water line, hit the ship, immobilize the ship. Now, when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, I told you there was 2 waves. They came in from the north. They came from, one unit came from the northeast, one from the northwest. They came in, they attacked the harbor. They were detected by U.S. radar. The first wave was detected 136 miles from the harbor. But guess what? They thought that it was a U.S. bomber formation. They dismissed the radar blips and they ignored it. And yes, sir.
How much did the torpedoes weigh?
That's a very good question. Anywhere, depending on the warhead, anywhere from 1,000 to about 2,500 pounds. So they were very very heavy and with a lot of power. Remember, to hit a battleship. Now the U.S. battleships, very thick armor. So you know all these weapons are designed to penetrate that armor. Now, somebody tell me about the Japanese midget submarines. And we're not talking about midgets that escaped from the circus that are manning these submarines. They're called midget submarines because they're very small. They had a crew of 2 and 3 men. The Japanese launched 5 of these little submarines off Pearl Harbor. 4 of them were grounded or sunk by the U.S. 1 was unaccounted for, and it's believed that one of those midget submarines put a torpedo into the USS Arizona. So the attack came in at 7:55. The sailors were sleeping in their ships, preparing for church, just waking up. Initially they thought this was a training exercise. There's hundreds of aircraft flying. They thought, wow, this is unusual, Navy aircraft on a Sunday. And then they realized they saw the markings on the planes, which was a red circle. They call it the meatballs. And they saw it, and then it didn't take long before they realized, wow, we're under fire. The planes came in, attack after attack after attack. The USS Arizona was one of 8 battleships at Pearl Harbor. The Arizona was attacked again and again. Eventually, one of the fighter bombers got through, dive bombers, and dropped a 500-pound bomb that penetrated the magazine of the ship. Does anybody know what the magazine is? The magazine is where they store all the ammo. So that bomb hit that magazine and the ship just erupted in catastrophic explosions and fire. All over Pearl Harbor now the Americans are being galvanized to action. There was a African-American sailor, Dorian Lee. He was a cook on one of the battleships. He saw what was going on. He manned a machine gun on the ship, shot down Japanese planes, was awarded the Navy Cross. All over the island now this is happening. The Americans are coming out, they're seeing the planes. The Japanese not only attacked all the ships sitting in the harbor, but they attacked the barracks at Schofield Barracks, where the soldiers are eating chow, or they're outside. They attacked Hickam Army Airfield. They destroyed over 250 American planes. This attack went on for 1 hour. 1 hour. At the end of the attack, the United States military shot down 29 Japanese planes. However, the damage to the U.S. fleet was catastrophic. Out of the 8 battleships, all were heavily damaged or sunk. Two of the ships were sunk. The USS Arizona and the USS Oklahoma, which had capsized. The Arizona had 1,100 sailors on it that went down with that ship. 1,100 sailors. Think about that. That's, a fourth of the size of Germantown. The Japanese pressed home their attack and made it back to the carrier task force, and they sailed back to Japan, victors. And meanwhile, the United States, the president was notified. Anybody know who the president was at the time of Pearl Harbor?
Roosevelt.
He's very good. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who you're going to hear a lot more about for the next 11 weeks. Franklin Delano Roosevelt said this is a day of infamy. And one of the most eloquent speeches you've ever heard a president give. The effect it had in the United States, most people didn't even know where Pearl Harbor was at. But people heard about it. All over America. The recruiting offices filled up with young men. Remember Pearl Harbor. The Americans felt betrayed because they were attacked without warning. Just like on 9/11. Attacked without warning, without provocation. 2,335 servicemen were killed. Over 1,100 were wounded. 65 civilians were killed. Mostly dependent wives, children of military. The innocence of the United States was completely lost. The United States was monitoring the war in Europe, as Jeremy talked about the last class. And they were monitoring the Japanese aggression in the Far East. But the innocence of the United States was lost. Pearl Harbor was a galvanizing force for the United States. The unity among every man, woman, and child in the military was extremely high. We realized that this was the beginning of a new era. Admiral Yamamoto at the end of the attack is purported to have said, "We have awoke a sleeping giant." After the attack, 6 of the battleships were put back into action by the United States. The guns from the Arizona were removed from the ship and put on other battleships that was used in the invasions of Okinawa and Iwo Jima. United States mobilized for complete and total war. And we'll talk about that in an upcoming class. What that meant that you guys, you went on rubber drives, you'd look for tires, you'd look for steel and scrap to turn it in for the War Department to make war materials. This meant that we had air raid wardens in the United States, that we had air raid drills. This meant that you closed your shades at night. This meant that you conserved on food and fuel, because this was total war. We had to beat Imperial Japan. Interestingly enough, on 8 December, Germany declared war on the United States. So now we were at war with Germany, Japan, and the Axis forces, which included Italy. Complete total war. And it all started for the United States on 7 December 1941. So, what was the Japanese primary target at the island? Did I tell you? The aircraft carriers. None of the aircraft carriers were present at the harbor when they attacked. This was their main target. The battleships were important, but the aircraft carriers is who they were after. Within 6 months of Pearl Harbor, those aircraft carriers were involved in the sinking of much of the Japanese fleet. Every Japanese carrier that fought at Pearl Harbor, that launched planes, was sunk by war's end. Admiral Yamamoto was killed by Allied fighter planes. He was shot down over New Guinea, I believe. So, but it was a long, terrible, painful struggle. And it affected every American. It affected every family. Every family had somebody that fought in a war. I guarantee it in the United States. 16 million Americans fought the war. 16 million. So, what questions do I have about Pearl Harbor? Yes, ma'am.
Where did the Japanese stage their refueling then? They didn't come directly from Japan, fly around for an hour and go back?
They launched from a point 230 miles north of the island of Oahu.
Okay.
That's where they launched from. The planes had sufficient fuel to launch from that point, attack the targets, and then get back to the carriers. And then the carriers,
Oh, from the carriers.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, I'm thinking mainland.
they
I
had
thought
6,
they
no,
had-
they
Right,
wouldn't, tactically they were unable to do that.
Yeah,
They had 6 aircraft carriers. The lead aircraft carrier, the command ship, was called the Akagi, A-K-A-G-I. It's interesting to read. That was sank by the United States eventually. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
How many people were killed on the USS Oklahoma?
I don't know the answer to that, but it was in the hundreds. And you bring up a good point. It was so tragic because some of the ships, the Oklahoma capsized, and some of the sailors were trapped in the ships. And the Americans tried to rescue many of these young sailors and Marines in the ships. And for days they could hear knocking in the ships. They would try to cut in and get to them before the water, got up inside the confines. The Arizona had 1,100 on it when it went down, and many of them were not recovered. Many of them are on the tomb, and let's move forward to that. This poster, remember December 7th. This was a rallying cry for the United States. Very important. This is the memorial for the USS Arizona. And what this is it's probably kind of hard for you to discern or to make out. This is the actual memorial. This is a little boat that comes and picks you up and takes you out to the memorial. This is the Arizona right here, under the water. These are the gun turret compartments. You can see the circular structure. That's where the gun turrets were at. So right below the surface there lays the Arizona with 1,100 sailors and Marines entombed on it. After the attack, and Delbert's going to talk about this, the Americans went around and tried to save the survivors and also took care of our war dead. We have a piece of the U.S. Arizona. When we're done with the class, you guys can come and look at it. We wrote the War Department, the Navy Department. We asked for a piece of the Arizona, and they sent this to us. much of the Arizona was salvaged after the battle and put into dry dock on the shore. Any other questions about the attack? Real quick, American aircraft during the attack. We were unable really to get many of our fighter planes airborne because the Japanese attacked the airfields. And you know, they bomb the airfields. When you bomb an airfield, guess what? The planes can't take off because there's craters on the runways. But a couple of our fighter planes got up and shot down some Japanese planes. We also had a formation of bombers, unarmed American bombers, fly into the Japanese attack coming from the mainland. They had no clue that this attack was going on. There's a really good movie called Tora, Tora, Tora. It's came out in the late 70s. I recommend you read it or view it. It's a long movie, but it tells you, lays out the attack very well, lays out the consequences of the attack. Anybody know what Tora, Tora, Tora means? Tiger, tiger, tiger. This was a code word that the Japanese, one of the Japanese squadron commanders, when they went in for the attack, they were to signal the Japanese fleet that the attack is a complete surprise. They would use the code word Tora. So he Tora, Tora, Tora. Complete surprise on the American air attack. It's interesting too, the Hawaiian people were out. It's a predominantly agriculture in a rural area. They were out picking pineapples in the fields, working on the farms. Here comes these massive waves of aircraft flying very low. People are looking at them. There's the red circles. It took forever before people really realized this is an actual attack on the United States. So what I'd like to do right now, any other questions? We're going to bring Delbert Sherritt up here, and I'd like us to give him a welcome, please. Delbert was born in 1923. He's originally from Bell Fountain, Ohio. He lives between here and Middletown on Germantown, Middletown Road. In 1941, Delbert joined the Navy. He saw a relative home on leave in his Cracker Jack uniform with his blue bell bottoms and his white hat tilted. And Delbert said, "That's the plan for me." And Delbert joined the U.S. Navy. He went to Great Lakes Training Center near Chicago, which is still there. And guess where Delbert ended up at? Pearl Harbor, just a few days before the attack. Now, Delbert is one of the kindest, most gentle people you'll ever meet. He loves to talk to you guys, and he wants you to ask him questions, and he's not going to bite, okay? So, without further ado, we're going to ask Delbert to tell us a little bit about, when you arrived at Pearl Harbor and what your duties were, Delbert.
Well, first, Dave, I would like to tell everyone how heartwarming it is to see each one of you here to learn more about Pearl Harbor. That, oh my, whoopee. I'm so happy to have you here. And I know Dave is too. I could start in August of 1941. And all of you know your vacation's almost over with in August. You're about got to go back to your school. That happened to me. I said to myself, do I want to go back to school? No, I don't want to go back. But I started to go back to school. I'd been up visiting my mother, who was at Xenia taking care, helping her sister take care of her little baby boy. I was up there visiting her, and it's time for me to get back to Washington Courthouse to go to school. So I started out to go and walking about 50 miles away from Washington Courthouse. I got to the road that goes to Washington Courthouse from a shortcut that I took. Turned around and went back to my mom. Said, Mom, I don't want to go back to school. I want to join the U.S. Navy. So she agreed, and I had to get the permission from my father also, got that. But my father, he didn't want to sign the permission paper for me to go. He said I would get killed in the war, you know. He was kind of shaky about losing his son. Though I kept talking to him, he finally let me go. And I went to the recruiting officer in Dayton, Ohio, signed the papers. They sent me to Cincinnati. I was sworn into the United States Navy for 6 years. Whoopee. And from there, they sent me to Great Lakes, Illinois for my training. After my training, they assigned me to the Seaman Guard there at Great Lakes, Illinois base. After a few days of that, walking up and down the lakefront and guarding the commander's yacht and the power plant there, I was fed up with it. So I complained. But this is what complaining got me into. I went to my commanding officer and said, "Sir, I didn't join this Navy to walk up and down the lakefront like a soldier. I want a ship." The next day I was on my way to Pearl Harbor. I got there December the 2nd, 1941. Good duty, but after December the 7th, I was homesick, wanted to go home, but I couldn't. They assigned me on the submarine base and put me on the USS Seagull. Immediately we went to sea, and we were doing war games at Lahaina Roads with the submarine, a PBY, and a destroyer. The submarine would fire a dummy torpedo at a target. Our job was to go retrieve the torpedo and take it back to the base and get them recharged. That Sunday morning, all activity was retired for holiday routine. I was in the mess hall eating my breakfast, listening to the beautiful Hawaiian music coming over the radio, and all of a sudden they come out, "Everybody take cover, we're being bombed." We went into general quarters right away. I went and manned my gun. I was the third shellman on the 3-inch starboard anti-aircraft gun, and we headed back for the harbor right away, which it's about 80 miles from the harbor. Our ship was probably doing about 12 to 14 knots an hour, which is about 10 miles an hour getting back to harbor. So it took us all day and all night, most of the night. We got there just at daybreak. It was getting daylight. And no sleep. We were all wide awake in general quarters. And we were challenged at the harbor. We were challenged by one of our submarines. Our signalman on the bridge, it was blackout, couldn't find the little blinker gun to answer. And the captain of the submarine, he told us later that he was getting ready to fire a torpedo at us. But they found it just in time, just before he gave the order. So that was my first real close call. Did I know? I didn't know about it. We didn't, the crew didn't. And we tied up at the dock, and we were still manning our guns in general quarters watching. The gun captain said, "Commence firing," on the starboard gun. I reached up to the ready box to pull out that big shell. I thought it was awful big. It was 3-inch shell. I pulled it out and I dropped it. Ooh. I went down to my knees and caught it like this. Passed it on to the second shellman, they put it in the gun and started firing. When I finished, I only had one row of shells left in the ready box. How? I never dropped any more though. But I can't remember only pulling out the first one and the last one. After the gun went off, I just lost it, I guess. I just went like I was supposed to. What actually happened, this is kind of sad though. What actually happened, immediately they were sending planes out to the Hawaiian Islands from California. Their orders were to fly around the harbor. Well, this one plane was going across the harbor. Every gun in the harbor opened up on it. Of course, you know it didn't make it. And that was the sad part, because it was our plane, see? But we had no clue of knowing. And of course, that was the sad day.
Delbert's ship was 128 feet long. It was English made. And it had a crew of about 35 men, very small. Was it wooden?
No, it was metal.
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 Tell them about the USS Nevada at the harbor entrance.
Yeah, when we come in the harbor, we went by the USS Nevada, which had run aground. It was the only ship in the harbor that got underway.
Battleship.
Yeah, the battleship USS Nevada. It run aground, and after we did the firing that morning, and they sent us over to the USS Nevada to pump out the water and lift it up so they could get it underway. But they decided after we pumped there for about a week, we were just recirculating the water. The hole was too big, so they secured us. But while the first day we went alongside, this was kind of it taught me compassion though, after it really did. And if any of you inclined to join the military? If you do, I'd like to urge you to do so. It's not all that bad, but you have to learn discipline real quick. But I would encourage you to do that if you so want to get into the military. Because in August of 1941, that's what I decided to do. I didn't want to go back to school and went to the military. And they secured us from the pumping air at the Nevada because the hole was too big, and they sent divers down to patch the hole, and they got it floating and got it back into service with Nevada. Of course, the hardest part was going past the Arizona for me. When we'd have to go past the Arizona to get back to the submarine base. Can anyone here, anybody can tell me what they've learned about Pearl Harbor?
Don't be shy.
Anybody?
That you carried weapons there. That you carried a lot of weapons, and like if you ever got under attack.
Did you hear?
Yes. He said that after the attack, you guys manned your weapons, as you talked about going to your deck gun. What type of planes did the Japanese use at the during the attack?
Torpedo bombers and Cape planes.
Torpedo bombers, what else?
Zeros.
Zeros, which were fighters, very good. They used one other type of plane. Remember the high angle attack? What was that?
It was
Dive bombers.
Did you?
Now, do you know whose uniform this is? This is Delbert's. This is Delbert's hat. They call them Donald Duck hats, for obvious reasons. And Delbert, tell them what that is on there.
Oh, this is what the Hawaiian dancers wear when they do their show. It's called the lei. Of course, they may have other meetings, but I found out a few weeks ago, one of my friends went to Hawaii to visit. I said, would you please bring me back a rock from Hawaii? Well, they got the rock and they were getting ready to bring it back, but they weren't allowed to bring anything back because the Hawaiian Islands, their land is all sacred to them. They're not allowed to take any of it away. So I didn't get my rock.
This is Delbert posing with the Springfield rifle. And Delbert went on to serve in the Navy until 1945, and in the Pacific Theater, basically his ship became a submarine tender, and he lost many friends who were on the submarines. The submariners, they call them in the Navy, were very brave. They would go out to sea for days at a time, underwater, looking for Japanese and German targets. A lot of times they never came back. So Delbert knew many young men who never made it back. You want to tell them about how you met your wife, Delbert?
Well, this is kind of a sneaky story. Anyway, my shipmate, who he was talking about there, had dated my wife's sister. And he wanted to write to my wife's sister, but he had a girlfriend. And he didn't want his girlfriend to know that he was writing to her. So he had me write to my wife. It wasn't my wife at the time. She was a junior in high school at the time. And so he put his letter in my letter, but I bet you can all guess what her sister did when she got his letter. She took it over and showed it to his girlfriend. Of course, he got a Dear John letter then. He lost his girlfriend. But anyway, he was one of my closest shipmates that got me and my wife acquainted. And because the pay was much higher, he got transferred to the USS Grayling. And knowing this war patrol, he would come over and talk to me when he come into port on his very last war patrol that he had. He come over and told me bye and left and never came back. He's still out there. They don't know for sure what happened to his submarine. And if any of you ever beat at Colorado, that's where the USS Grayling Memorial is now. Be sure and go see it for me. That's a story about how I met my wife. And I honored, his name was Clyde Nichols. He was from Oklahoma. That's where my wife came from, Oklahoma. I honored him by having Buzz Lupin. I know none of you know who Buzz Lupin is. He used to be our congressman. I had him to fly the flag over the Capitol building to honor Clyde. They sent me back the flag and a certificate. And Dave just recently located some pictures of my crew members, and I saw that was his picture. So I have his picture there to put up with his flag and certificate.
We have a picture of Delbert downstairs with his wife in his Navy uniform, and they're both very, very young at the time that picture was taken.
Yeah, 4 was married though, Dave.
Tell everyone how you felt after the attack on Pearl Harbor. Tell everybody the sentiment of the American people and the American military. What were your emotions and your feelings after the attack?
Oh, my. I don't know if I could bring it out so they could understand, but anyway, it was a big, big letdown. I thought, why in the world would anyone want to hurt our country that way when we have such a big heart? And those palm trees were those heat of the palms, they were pitiful. It was, and there was about 3 inches of oil all over the harbor. The best thing I can remember, which brought me to my senses, in a motor launch out there in all that oil and water, that sailor was trying to fish the American flag out of the water. That's the most thing that kind of healed me down to know, well, we'll get after them now and we'll make them pay. That's what I started thinking then.
Tell them about when the war ended, what your feelings were like. So remember, this is December 7th, 1941. The war in the Pacific ended in August 1945, 4 years later almost. So tell them what your sentiments and your feelings were at the time.
When the war ended, I had my last liberty. I'd already taken training to go invade Japan. And I got off the trolley in San Diego. I was going up to see my wife and tell her bye, because we'd already got married. And as soon as I got off the trolley, people come swarming out of them buildings downtown. The street was full of people. They were hugging and kissing and hollering, "The war's over, the war's over." Was I so happy? And of course, I ran up to get my wife. We tried to get downtown. No way, too many people hugging and hollering and carrying on.
So 4 years later, the war ended. 416,000 Americans were killed in action, and almost 1 million were wounded. So all over America, they celebrated the end of the terrible war. And people like Delbert, you know, they lived through this. They experienced it. They were first-hand participants. In this area, there's probably 2 to 3. We know of 2 other Pearl Harbor survivors, but they're leaving us. There's 800,000 World War II veterans left now out of 16 million, and 500 a day pass on. So, you know, this is a great honor for you guys to be able to meet Delbert, to listen. Future generations will have to read books. So when we wrap up here, if you have anything you want to say to Delbert, if you want to ask him any questions, please feel free to do so. So we're very honored to have Delbert here today. Is there anything you want to add, Delbert, to wrap this up?
Just study your books real hard and learn what you have to and get with it, and whatever you do, always protect our country, because it's the best country in the world. You're so fortunate. That's why I was out there, so you could get your education and be free to do whatever you desire to do.
Those are good parting words. So let's give Delbert a hand for coming today. All right.
Dave, I'd like to welcome to come back here anytime
Yep.
you want to.
You guys, they're here every Friday. So for the next 12 weeks, they'll be here every Friday.
Every time.
Tomorrow, the museum is having a lecture. It's called Iwo Jima. We're having 4 World War II Marines and sailors who fought on the island of Iwo Jima. The Marine Corps suffered 20,000 casualties on the Battle of Iwo Jima. Iwo Jima represents the other end of Pearl Harbor. 1941, the war started. Iwo Jima was the last major land battle before Japan surrendered. Next to last, Okinawa, one of the last. So, very important. So, again, thank you for coming today. You guys were a good class today. Next class is April 1st, which is April Fool's Day. No shenanigans in here during the class. We're gonna have the class at 10:30 or maybe a little later. We'll see how it works. So, any questions for Delbert or me before you are released?
I just wanted to, Justin gave me this paper here. It's Night at the Museum in Springfield tomorrow night, right? I think it's the
Yep.
19th. And I think you, Jeremy and Justin are going to be there, and it looks like a lot of fun if anyone's interested in seeing it, or I can pass it up, we'll pass it around, so just wanted to share that.
They both, Justin and Jeremy, went up to this museum. It's the Clark County Historical Society in Springfield. It's an amazing looking place, and they spoke highly of this museum. It's not just military history, it's early American history, settlers, pioneers, all the history of that era. Yes, sir.
Dave, I'd like to tell them after I got out of the service, I did go back to school, went to classroom, got my diploma, went on to Ohio State. And then my wife got pregnant, we had our family. I couldn't stay going to school and not being home with my baby, so I went to work for Armco. I later retired from Armco after 30 years. Now I've been retired longer than I worked, so what do you do about that? Anyway, it's sure a blessing to have you all here today.
All right, thank you very much. You guys are released. If you want to look at the Arizona, the fragment that we have, it's incredible, it really is.